Here we go with a powerful first pack, the best cards being the rare and the uncommons. Shimmy Inspector, Vampire Nighthawk, Essence Drain, and Liliana's Shade in black, Arm Stealer and Searing Spear in red, and an Acidic Slime, which would be the lone green card, which is any good. Nothing to note of white or blue, so I think it comes down to a power level pick, and that's clearly Vampire Nighthawk. It's just the best out of these cards, probably one of the best uncommons in this format, and the interesting question is how the signaling is going to work now that we have the Nighthawk. People behind us are going to be drafting black, red, and green cards, most likely, so it might be a good idea to stay out of these colors and go with white or blue instead, but we should certainly try to solidify black and look which kind of cards are there. Now, here we have Mock Flunkies, Bloodhunter Bat, Prey Upon as the best common cards, I believe. The uncommons aren't exciting, a rare is missing, so I think Bloodhunter Bat would do a good job of signaling that we are trying to be the black drafter at the table, while Prey Upon is probably the strongest card in a vacuum. It does work nicely with the Nighthawk, but you really need some high toughness creatures. I'm going to try to force my way into black a little bit by picking up the Bloodhunter Bat here, and hopefully making sure that our left neighbors stay out of black if possible. And the Essence Drain certainly isn't one of the stronger cards in our first pack, so it might be possible that people pick Shimmy Inspector instead of Acidic Slime or Searing Spear, but they really shouldn't. Even Arm Stealer is better than Shimmy Inspector, I believe. Here we get a late Chronometon, and we should make this our pick. Intrepid Hero is nice, but kind of fancy. You have to have a lot of going to get him to work. Turn to Slack is one of my favorite cards in the format because it solves so many problems, but I see no reason to pick the red card here when I can go for the colorless card that will always make my deck and will win me quite a lot of games in my starting hand. Also of note is Sentinel Spider, so we're seeing everything but white or blue cards, so that's something to keep in mind. Next, there is a Giant Scorpion in black, which I like much better than Mark of the Vampire. I actually think that Giant Scorpion is a very important tool for black decks to dominate the early game 2 and 3 drops of your opponent while still being able to trade with later creatures like Vastfoot Gorger. So I'm not opposed to picking the Scorpion here, but we also see two of the best green commons in Centaur Cursor and Arbor Elf, where I actually prefer the Cursor. I know that a lot of people have Arbor Elf as number one, but I think the 3 mana 3/3 is more important than the situational ramp, depending on if you have him on turn 1, of course, while the Cursor will always do his job. However, I'm going to go with the Scorpion here. I really think that he's underrated, and he's going to help me to stay in black. And I don't think he's that much worse than the Cursor. So the Ring of Colonia, of course, not very interesting because we haven't picked up a single green card yet. But there's a second Giant Scorpion, and I see no reason to deviate from my color if I would instead pick up a 3-drop in another color that's comparable in power level, I guess. And Tether Knight is really nice, and I know that you can draft black-white in this format, but I think that Exalted overall isn't as good as people expected, and it took a lot of time to realize that it's actually not that great. Now, this is a time where I'm much more interested in a Mark of a Vampire. It's not great on Vampire Nighthawk, but that guy is insane anyway. But it's great on all of our creatures so far. It's actually quite threatening to have a 3/5 Death Touch lifelink Giant Scorpion, and of course it's great on Chronometon, as on Bloodhunter Bat. So continuing with the theme of picking up the black cards, I think that's what I'm going to do. Ravenous Reds is worse, I believe, and there is no reason to pick up an Evolving Wilds right now. Okay, the power level decreasing, of course. The question is, once again, if we want to keep picking black cards. A Disentomb usually not the strongest card, but if you have two giants, well, 3 Death Touch creatures and a Bloodhunter Bat, it rises in value quite a bit. And I think I like it more than the other cards. Titanic Growth, one of the sleepers of this set, I believe. I think green decks really make good use of Titanic Growth. But Chandra's Fury and Kindled Fury are also very good red cards. I just don't see a reason to not pick a card that's most likely going to make our deck. So I'm still not seeing the signals for a second color. Maybe red. We saw the Eternal Slag and now the second Chandra's Fury. But Chandra's Fury is a card where it really depends on how people evaluate both the card itself but also their role. I know that some people only pick it if they are aggressive, although it can be a very nice control card as well. So this card is kind of tough to evaluate, and it's not always clear if this card means that red is open. However, I think that Bloodthorn Vampire is really one of the worst black cards, so there's no reason to pick it. I also don't like to play 2-mana 2/2s if I can help it. I like to be the deck that dominates 2-mana 2/2s. So Timber Pack Wolf, not really in consideration here. Volcanic Strength is a card that's actually quite nice, especially against red, of course. But I don't know if this deck needs creature enchantments apart from Mark of the Vampire. I'm just going with the creature here, simply because, if anything, that's what you might need in the end, but I'm not really planning on playing these guys currently. Now, I think I'm just going to stick with the red 5-drops. I have no trouble dealing with the other cards, and this might make my deck. There's a very small chance. So even though I'm going to pick up the red cards here, it really doesn't have to mean anything. We can still be black and any other color as well. So currently we have a Chandra's Fury, a Torch Fiend, and maybe a Fire Elemental in red, but I'm really looking at the black cards as the core of my deck and my strategy. And here we go, pack 2. It looks like we can continue picking up black cards. Knight of Infamy, Bloodhunter Bat, Cower in Fear, all very good. Mark of the Vampire is okay, and we might play a second one, but I'm not looking to first pick it. The alternative is to continue with the red cards in a removal spell, but I'm still not really sure if we want to be drafting red. I would have picked Knight of Infamy a couple of days or weeks ago, but as I said, I'm not really that interested in the Exalted mechanic, and I really don't like playing the 2-mana 2/1s in this format. Against white, it's great, but if you don't have it, I don't really want this card. Cower in Fear has mad potential, but Bloodhunter Bat will always be good. So I think I'm going with the Bat here, and I'm going to try to make sure to have ways to deal with 1 toughness creatures in other ways. For example, by blocking with Ravenous Reds. But let's check out the pack first. Cathedral of War is okay. It's quite fine, especially with lifelink, but it's not insane. The Tome can be really good, but I like to have a removal heavy deck, and my deck is looking to curve out with efficient creatures, so it's not really a Tome deck right now. The best cards are Fairy Invaders, Pacifism, and Armstealer, but I don't have any goblins for Armstealer yet, so that makes the strongest card in the pack a little worse. However, I do have all these red cards already, so I'm kind of inclined to go with red anyway. This also returns Arms Dealer as a second removal spell. I think the reasons are just there to stick with the red card, given that it's most likely the most powerful card in this pack anyway. And now we immediately get the option of picking up another Goblin, which is nice, but depending on our mana curve, depending on our mana base, if we only play 7 or 8 mountains, it's not always going to be possible to drop Arms Dealer and have a second red and so on, but I guess the same applies to Turnless Slag also. I think that Goblin Arsonist is much better than Duty Bound Dead, and there's really no reason to pick up a Mind Rot here, so even though it's certainly not the strongest card in the pack, I think it's the card we should pick up. And I see it more as a defensive card rather than an offensive one. This is a Murder as a 4th pick, which shows that most people to our left aren't drafting black, and that's kind of natural given that apart from the first pack we didn't pass any black cards, and we are reaping the rewards. There's also Prey Upon and Flinthof Boar, so this must have been quite a good pack. We have the shot at a 3rd Giant Scorpion, but Crimson Mark Raider is the allied color uncommon creature in our colors. So we get a 3/2 for 2 mana that also regenerates. And even though I like Giant Scorpion, that's just so much better. And another Flinthof Boar, and I'm happy that we have a lot of ways to block these guys as well. I don't see a reason to hate draft here, but I think I'm just going with Rummaging Goblin. Next we have the choice between Ravenous Rats and Mind Rot. I didn't pick up the Cower in Fear, so we are still looking at ways to deal with X1 creatures or a lot of tokens. And I believe that Ravenous Rats should do a pretty good job with that. I always like to run at least one. You usually have ways to use the 1/1 body. And on a similar note, I like the way Wall of Fire helps you to handle large creatures, hexproof creatures, just green creatures in general. But I'm pretty sure I'm going with Duress here. Just like with Negate or Counter Spells, I like to have some answers to everything my opponent could have. And Duress deals with Planeswalkers and equipments, which it's sometimes difficult to have the right answers to. So Wall of Fire also not that interesting because we are planning to play more swamps than mountains, of course. Mark of the Vampire tabled, Cower in Fear, and Night of Infamy didn't, but that was to be expected. So let's pick up a second mark. Elixir is interesting for the Tome control decks, but not for us. And somebody gets the late Archaeomancer, but that's fine. And I'm picking up some more cards I'm going to be happy to play. Here I'm hate drafting Kite Sail because it's interesting for more people than the green cards. And a Zombie Goliath is actually just a little weaker than Fire Elemental. Usually I tend to have trouble finding playables in the early days of a format, and the more I play, the more playables I get. I don't know if that's because your point of view changes, or well, if it's also because the way of drafting changes. For example, now this draft I've gotten a lot of playables because I cut black successfully during pack 1. So there was basically always a card I was happy to pick. Well, the Arsonist was a very early pickup, but it should be a nice addition to our deck. But let's come to this pack. We see Nicol Bolas, and we would only have to splash an island, which we could do with, let's say, an island and an Evolving Wilds. Our mana is also looking fine. We do have Murder and Nighthawk, but nothing else that costs double black. And the alternatives would be cards we don't want, or cards we don't really need, like Servant of Neferox. Flunkies, I guess, wouldn't be the worst card, and it's possible that this is like the more reasonable pick, given that we can curve out with Flunkies 2-drops and 3-drops. But I really like to pick up Nicol Bolas here. I think he's awesome, and I would love to splash him. It's probably a bit greedy, but I'm fine with that. Now, I think we have to go with the more efficient removal spell here. Certainly better than Rummaging Goblin and Essence Drain. It might actually be worse than a third Bloodhunter bet, but we are quite low on removal, and Searing Spear is a very good way of making sure that the early game doesn't go out of control too early. Now, so far I haven't seen an Evolving Wild, sadly, but we might find one sooner or later. I really like Disentomb, but I'm afraid we won't be able to play two of them, just because our deck is going to be very full. However, I'm not really interested in picking up a Krenko's Command. I know that it combos with Armstealer, but I think having the low impact card when we don't draw Armstealer is actually more of a detriment compared to the bonus we get, to the bonus gobbling we get by playing Krenko's Command if we draw Armstealer and it lives and we have the mana and time to shoot everything. So even though you have one Armstealer doesn't mean that Krenko's Command is the card you should pick. I'm not happy with going with Disentomb here, but we do have some very nice targets, so it's certainly possible that we have matchups where we want a second one. Next, there is Sign in Blood and Gilded Lotus. I guess that's it. Now, Gilded Lotus is insanely fun and it's a great card, but I found that in the most cases, another land would just do the job just fine. I know that we are trying to splash Nicol Bolas, but the tempo it costs to cast a 5-mana Lotus is really huge. So if I play a land instead, I'm going to have my 6th land instead of the Lotus, but it's also going to be my 2nd or 3rd land at some point. So I prefer just playing 18 lands and picking up another playable here. And Sign in Blood also helps in reaching the mana for our late game spells. So I'm not happy to pass the Lotus, but I think the Lotus in the most cases you are better off not playing it. So yeah, I don't think we are losing much there. This pack we could get a 3rd Reds or a 2nd Mind Rot, which we certainly don't need, but I don't think that we need any other card out of this pack, and I'm not too scared about the rings. Of course, the rings are a problem, given that we are semi-control deck, but I don't think that hate drafting Ring of Valkas would really accomplish what we are trying to do. I also like Ravenous Rats and Disentomb as a very cheap way of doing something in the early game while still having a card in the deck that's whose potential grows with time. So I could actually see myself playing just all the Disentombs and all the Ravenous Rats, for example, really punishing people that have to mulligan or that need mana for their late game spells. Tome, Aven Squire, and that's basically it. We wouldn't play any of the other cards. Squire would be a pure hate draft. The Tome could make our deck, might make our deck. I wouldn't expect it, but I think we can pass another Aven Squire without running too much danger. Second Arson is already a card I'm not too interested in because of its low impact, but we can note that there's a Planar Cleansing going around and keep it in mind. I don't need any of the other cards, so that's fine. Rootbound Cracks, sadly, not the right duel to splash Nicol Bolas. So if we want to play him, we're going to have to do it without an island, which is unfortunate, but something we can't change. Now, it's easy to lose a game to a Scroll Thief. It's also possible to lose a game to Ring of Ever's Isle. I think I'm probably weaker against the Ring in general. So let's just take that. And I don't think we want to play against Tormented Soul. And it's very unlikely that we are going to put Dark Favor on one of our creatures, given that we have 2 Mark of the Vampires already. We could also have picked up the Smelt. That probably would have been the better sideboard card instead of a Hate Draft that's probably not going to accomplish much. And these cards are most likely not going to make our deck. So let's see if we can play Nicol Bolas or not. I'm just going to start with the cards we're going to run no matter what, and that are given considering how our deck looks like, and then we get a good idea of how many more cards we need and how our deck's going to shape up. What's immediately apparent is that we have a nice mix of creatures and spells. I actually like that quite a bit. I added 1 Arsonist. We could play a second one, but don't know if that's necessary. Now, our curve basically ends at 5, which means that Nicol Bolas is quite a bit out there. We would have to draw 3 useless lands before we could cast him, and then they also have to be the right lands. So we would need to have 2 islands in 18 lands probably to cast him consistently, and that would also mean that we can't loot away our additional lands because, well, we would need to drop the Planeswalker at some point. So as sad as it makes me, I currently think that this is probably not a Nicol Bolas deck, because we would much rather win by putting Mark of the Vampire on one of our 3 or 4 drops and winning that way. It's sad, but probably Fire Elemental just does a better job than Nicol Bolas for this deck. It's yeah, I think it's just a reality. Now let's see how this deck would look like if we really go all out Ravenous Rats and using Disentomb to get back our later cards. Then we would probably look at something like this. Now, of course, we wouldn't play Duress or Mind Rot because of the Ravenous Rats, although Ravenous Rats don't always hit what you need to hit. Same goes for Mind Rot, whereas Duress is really nice if our opponent has a good target for it. Now, I don't think that this deck needs a Kite Sail, and Phyrexian Hulk should be worse than Fire Elemental in most cases. Well, except if we don't draw a second red, but that's not a big concern. The Tome, once again, something we could play, but our deck is also quite full already. So it's really not clear how much we can do in that regard. Now, I don't think we need these anti-control cards currently, and we are already playing 1 Fire Elemental as our 5-drop of choice. I like to have the Disentombs to get back Nighthawk, Armstealer, Bloodhunter Bat, and Fire Elemental rather than playing more expensive cards, because the Disentomb is also going to get back the cheaper cards. Now, this looks like it could work as it is, and I think that looks actually quite good. We do have a lot of sideboard options, so if I don't think that we are going to board in Kite Seal any time. So basically we have more discard. We have a second Arsonist against Well, we don't need Battle Jester. We have a second Arsonist against decks with a lot of low toughness creatures, although the Ravenous Rats also do a good job. And Volcanic Strength is going to be nice if our opponent plays any mountains. So Nicol Bolas, potentially we could board into a very controlish build by bringing in Duress, Mind Rot, Tome, and Nicol Bolas. If our opponent is playing a lot of card draw and we know that Ravenous Rats aren't going to cut it, then it's easily possible that we go for the all-out break our opponent plan by doing the most unfair stuff. So that would be probably like an 18 land deck without the rats, without 1 or 2 Disentombs, and these late game cards instead. But I think this is fine. We could potentially play the second Fire Elemental because it fits really nicely. And I think I want another 5-drop in this deck. Just because Mark of the Vampire is going to be really good on Fire Elemental. So I think cutting 1 Ravenous Rats seems like a good idea. And we can still play 10-7 without being in too much danger of not being able to cast Fire Elemental. We need 2/5 of our lands to give us red to cast a Fire Elemental on turn 5. And if we go for 10-7, we have, well, 7 out of 17, which is, yeah, I think we should be fine. Like, it's going to be bad if it doesn't work out, which is possible if we draw 4 swamps and 1 mountain, but we have only 1.5 times as many swamps as mountains, so it's not very likely that we draw 4 times as many. Okay, I think I like this setup. Hopefully we can put our Disentombs to good use and use our Mark of the Vampires together with our efficient creatures to win the game. Let's see how it goes.